The kennel erupted in chaos as the gray-muzzled German Shepherd launched himself against the chain-link fence, his howls unlike anything the shelter workers had heard in the 8 years he'd been there. His amber eyes were locked on someone, across the parking lot. A man in a worn veteran's cap stood frozen, one hand pressed against his chest as if his heart might explode. "That's impossible," whispered Director Karen Mills, her clipboard clattering to the floor. "That dog hasn't reacted to anyone in 8 years. He's been catatonic since the day he arrived, but the dog, Rex, remembered everything." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. James Morrison had been 42 years old when the IED took his legs and his memories in Kandahar. The blast had scattered his unit across the desert sand, and in the chaos of evacuation, in the screaming and the blood and the smoke, his partner had been left behind. Rex, his military working dog, his brother, his reason for surviving. For 8 years, James had searched through every military database, every K-9 handler network, every shelter within 500 miles of where he'd been stationed. The guilt had eaten him alive. Nights he couldn't sleep, days he couldn't breathe, knowing that Rex was out there somewhere, waiting for a handler who never came back. The doctors said the dog was likely dead. PTSD counselors told him to let go, to move forward. His ex-wife had left because he couldn't. Because every penny he earned from his disability check went toward the search. Because he kept a dog bed in the corner of his apartment that had never been used. "You're looking for a ghost," his therapist had said gently, 3 months ago. "You need to accept that and start healing." But James Morrison didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in loyalty. He believed that somewhere, his dog remembered him too. The call came on a Tuesday morning from a rural Montana shelter, 300 miles from nowhere. A volunteer named Sarah Chen had been digitizing their old records, dogs that had been there so long they'd become part of the furniture, invisible to potential adopters. "We have a German Shepherd," Sarah had said over the phone, her voice uncertain. "Male, approximately 15 years old, no microchip, but he has scars consistent with military working dogs. Arrived 8 years ago with no identification except, well, there's a faded tag that just says property of U.S. Army." James had dropped the phone. His hands shook so badly he could barely drive. Now, standing in this parking lot in the middle of Montana, watching a dog go absolutely feral with recognition behind that fence, James Morrison finally understood what it meant to come home. "Sir, you need to step back," Karen Mills warned as James approached the kennel on his prosthetic legs, moving faster than he had in 8 years. "He's been aggressive with everyone. We've almost had to put him down twice because—" "Open the gate." "Sir, I really don't think—" "That's my dog." James's voice cracked. "That's Rex. Service number K458. Handler Morrison, James C. We were separated in Kandahar on August 12th, 8 years ago. Open the gate." Karen looked at the dog, then at the man. Rex had stopped howling. He stood perfectly still now, every muscle quivering, his intelligent amber eyes fixed on James with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. She opened the gate. For one suspended heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Rex crossed the 10 feet between them in a single bound, and James went down, not from the impact, but because his legs gave out, because grief and joy and 8 years of guilt hit him all at once. The dog was everywhere. Whining, crying, sounds no one had ever heard from him, pressing his scarred muzzle against James's face, his neck, his chest, pawing at him as if to make sure he was real. James wrapped his arms around that massive, trembling body and sobbed into the gray fur, and Rex licked the tears away like he'd done 1,000 times in a war zone half a world away. "I'm sorry," James whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry, boy. I looked for you. I never stopped looking. I'm so sorry." Rex's response was to press even closer, as if trying to crawl inside James's chest where he belonged. Sarah Chen knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face. "How?" she asked softly. "How did he end up here?" James looked up, his eyes red but clearer than they'd been in years. After the blast, everything was chaos. Multiple casualties. Rex wasn't injured, but in the evacuation, someone made a call. Wounded soldiers first, equipment later. By the time they went back for him, he stopped, his jaw clenching. Military working dogs are expensive, tens of thousands in training. They don't just lose them. Someone filed paperwork saying Rex died in the blast. It was easier than admitting they'd left him behind and couldn't find him. Jesus, Karen whispered. I filed reports, requests. I called every day for 6 months. But according to the system, Rex was dead. James's hand never stopped moving through the dog's fur, as if confirming he was real. I should have known better. Rex doesn't die easy. Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through old intake notes. 8 years ago, a trucker found him wandering Route 87, half-starved, covered in wounds. No collar, no tags except that army identifier. We tried to contact military bases, but we're just a small rural shelter. When no one claimed him, he waited. James pressed his forehead against Rex's. You waited for me. Rex's tail, which hadn't wagged in 8 years, swept the ground like a metronome, keeping time with James's heartbeat. Please subscribe to my channel, like, share, and comment. The veterinarian who examined Rex that afternoon was Dr. Rachel Torres, a woman who'd seen too many abandoned military dogs to have much faith left in the system. But watching Rex refuse to let James out of his sight, following him step for step, leaning against his legs, looking up every 3 seconds as if to confirm he was still there, she felt something crack open in her chest. He's in remarkable shape for 15, she said, checking Rex's teeth, his eyes, his joints. But he's been depressed, severely. I'm amazed he survived this long. Most dogs shut down like this. They just give up. He didn't give up. James's voice was steel. He's a Marine Corps working dog. We don't quit. Rachel smiled at the we. She pulled up Rex's x-rays. He has old fractures here and here, shrapnel scars, and this. She pointed to a healed wound along his shoulder. This was a bullet graze. Kandahar, James confirmed quietly. He took a round meant for me. Kept fighting anyway. Saved 3 soldiers that day before we even realized he was bleeding. Rachel looked at the dog pressed against his handler's legs, and then at the man who'd spent 8 years searching. What are your plans now? I'm taking him home, where he should have been all along. The shelter will need to complete the adoption paperwork. No. James's voice was flat. That's not an abandoned dog. That's a military working dog who has failed by his country. I'm not adopting him. I'm reclaiming my partner. Karen Mills, who'd been standing in the doorway, stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, legally, Rex belongs to the United States Army. I'm calling my congressman. I'm calling every veterans advocacy group I know. And I'm calling Channel 7 News. Because there are still good people in this world. And they need to know what happens to our war dogs when we decide they're inconvenient. He looked down at Rex, who gazed back with absolute, unshakable trust. But tonight he's coming home with me. You can try to stop us, or you can do the right thing. Karen looked at the dog, then at the man. She'd been running the shelter for 20 years. She knew what happened when you got between a soldier and his dog. I'll get the paperwork ready, she said quietly. Consider him released to your custody pending official military resolution. The story hit the local news that evening. By morning it was national. Forgotten war dog reunites with handler after 8 years, read the headlines. The video of that first moment, Rex launching himself at James, the two of them collapsed together in the parking lot, went viral. Within 48 hours, it had 15 million views. James Morrison's phone didn't stop ringing. Veterans groups rallied. Congress members issued statements. An investigation was launched into how a decorated military working dog had been written off as dead and left to rot in a rural shelter while his handler spent 8 years searching. The answers, when they came, were worse than anyone expected. Major David Holbrook had been the commanding officer who signed Rex's death certificate. He'd done it to cover up the fact that in the chaos of the evacuation, he'd prioritized equipment over a dog, expensive medical gear that later turned out to be damaged and unusable anyway. Rather than face questions about his judgment, he'd simply declared the dog Kia. It should have been a career-ending mistake. Instead, Holbrook had been promoted twice. He was now a colonel, heading a prestigious canine training program, making decisions about hundreds of military working dogs. When James learned this, When he understood that the man who'd abandoned Rex was now in charge of protecting other dogs, something cold and hard settled in his chest. "I'm not letting this go," he told Rachel Torres over coffee, Rex's head resting on his knee. They'd started meeting regularly. She'd become Rex's veterinarian and, slowly, James's friend. Maybe more than friend. "It's not just about Rex. It's about every dog they might do this to." Rachel set down her cup. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to testify. Congressional hearing next month. They want to review military working dog policies." He looked down at Rex. "And I'm bringing my partner. Let them see what they left behind." Don't forget to subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments. The hearing room in Washington, D.C. was packed. Veterans in uniform, animal rights activists, media from every major network. And in the front row, calm and steady despite the chaos, sat a 15-year-old German Shepherd whose amber eyes had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Colonel David Holbrook sat at the defense table, his jaw tight, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. James Morrison wheeled himself to the witness stand, and Rex followed without being asked, positioning himself exactly where he'd been trained, at his handler's left side, alert, protective, present. "Mr. Morrison," the chairwoman began, "can you tell us what happened on August 12th? James told them everything. The blast, the evacuation, waking up in a German hospital to learn his legs were gone and his dog was dead. The 8 years of searching, the guilt that had nearly destroyed him. I believed my country when they told me Rex was gone," James said quietly. "I believed that someone had tried to save him and failed. I never imagined that someone had simply decided he wasn't worth the effort." Across the room, Holbrook's face flushed. "And now?" the chairwoman asked. James looked down at Rex, who looked back with that same unwavering loyalty that had carried them both through hell. "Now I know that loyalty goes both ways. Or it should. Rex never gave up on me. He waited 8 years in a shelter, and the moment he saw me, he knew, he remembered." His voice broke. "Our military working dogs deserve better than to be written off as casualties when they're inconvenient." The room was silent. Then James pulled a folder from his bag. "I've been doing research. Rex isn't the only one. In the past 10 years, under Colonel Holbrook's oversight, 16 military working dogs have been declared KIA or missing when they were actually alive. Most of them were never found. Some were euthanized in shelters. 2 were used in dogfighting rings." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. The chairwoman banged her gavel. Holbrook stood, his face pale. Those are isolated incidents. The fog of war doesn't last 10 years, James cut him off, his voice like iron. "This is systematic negligence. And it ends now." The investigation took 3 months. When it concluded, Colonel David Holbrook was court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. 6 other officers received disciplinary action. The military's policies on working dog accountability were completely overhauled. And James Morrison, along with Rex, became the face of a movement. They traveled to military bases, to schools, to veterans' hospitals. James spoke about loyalty and second chances, about the dogs who serve without question and deserve to be served in return, about healing, how he'd been broken until the moment Rex came back into his life, and how together they were becoming whole again. Rex, for his part, seemed to understand his new mission. The catatonic, aggressive dog who'd terrified shelter workers became a therapy dog, gentle with wounded veterans, patient with children, a living reminder that even after the worst trauma, love could bring you back. Rachel Torres was there for all of it. She and James had become inseparable, her steady presence balancing his intensity, his determination giving her hope she'd lost years ago. 6 months after the hearing, she moved into his apartment, and Rex's dog bed finally had company. "He likes you," James said one evening, watching Rex sprawled between them on the couch, his gray muzzle resting on Rachel's lap. "He has excellent taste." She scratched behind Rex's ears, and the old dog's tail thumped contentedly. "You both do." James took her hand. For the first time in 8 years he felt something other than guilt. He felt peace, purpose, home. "I'm thinking about starting a foundation," he said quietly, "for military working dogs who've been retired or abandoned. Make sure they all get the happy endings they deserve." Rachel smiled. The Rex Foundation? Maybe. James looked down at his dog, his partner, his brother, his reason for everything. Someone needs to speak for them. Might as well be us. Rex's tail thumped again, as if in agreement. Hit that subscribe button, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Rex Foundation opened on a crisp Montana morning, on 20 acres of land purchased with donations that poured in from around the world. It was a sanctuary for retired military and police dogs, a place where they could live out their years in peace, receive medical care, and, if possible, be reunited with their handlers. James Morrison stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Rachel beside him, Rex sitting calmly at his feet. Behind them, 15 rescued military working dogs waited with their new handlers, veterans who'd been paired with dogs, who needed them as much as they needed the dogs. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything, James said to the crowd. 8 years ago, a shelter in rural Montana could have given up on a difficult, aggressive dog. Instead, they kept him safe, kept him fed, gave him a chance. He looked at Karen Mills, who dabbed at her eyes in the front row. Sarah Chen digitized old records when she didn't have to, made one phone call that brought me home. He knelt down, easier now, with practice, and wrapped his arms around Rex's neck. And this old soldier never stopped believing that loyalty matters, that love matters, that waiting for someone is never wasted time. Rex licked his face, and the crowd laughed through their tears. There are still good people in this world, James continued, standing again with Rachel's help. Good dogs, good hearts. You just have to look for them, and when you find them, you hold on, you never let go. Because that's what loyalty means. He cut the ribbon. Rex barked, a joyful sound no one at the shelter had ever heard, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Later, after the ceremony, after the speeches and photos and interviews, James and Rachel walked the property with Rex between them. The old dog moved slower now, his muzzle grayer, his joints stiffer, but his eyes were clear and bright, and his tail never stopped wagging. "How long do you think we have?" James asked quietly, the question he'd been avoiding for months. Rachel squeezed his hand. "However long it is, it's more than you had a year ago." "And he's happy, James. Look at him." Rex had stopped to sniff at a butterfly, his whole body wiggling with puppyish delight that made them both laugh. "He gave me 8 years, James said. Waited 8 years for me to find him. I'm going to make sure every day he has left is worth it." "We will," Rachel corrected gently, and James realized she'd said we, that she was here, in this, for as long as it lasted. They walked on together, man, woman, and dog, across land that would shelter hundreds of dogs in the years to come, all because one soldier refused to give up, and one dog refused to forget. Rex looked up at James, then at Rachel, then bounded ahead with a young dog's energy, as if to say, "Come on, we have work to do," and they did. So much work. So many dogs to save, so many veterans to help, so many reunions to create. But for now, in this moment, with the Montana sun warm on their faces and a future full of purpose stretching before them, James Morrison finally understood what it meant to come home. Not to a place, to a promise kept, to loyalty that transcended time and distance and every obstacle the world could throw at it, to love that waited 8 years and would wait forever if it had to. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.